Just for your information, if you need toilets, they are out here in the foyer, accessible toilets down at the end of the corridor. And in the unlikely event of a fire, the muster point is out through the doors through which you have come and outside the cathedral on the paved area outside the cathedral. Thank you. In our agenda, we will note the confirmation of the chair, confirmation of the vice chair, membership of the committee, and the terms of reference, which we have from full council. Everyone okay with that? Yes, thank you very much. Proposed dates of future meetings. Are we all roughly okay with those? Yeah. I think we've informally agreed those. I haven't just sprung them on for those who are onlookers. We've informally agreed those. So, Jeremy, you will pass those out as soon as possible.
Yes, I'll confirm those after the meeting, Chair.
Excellent, to have them in the diary.
Yeah.
Any apologies for absence or substitutions?
I've not been advised of any, Chair, for the meeting.
Doesn't look like it to me, so that's great. Everyone's here, I expect to be here, and no one different. Declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations of interest, please? No, we do not. The minutes of the previous meeting, I accept that many of us, or indeed all of us, might not have been present at that meeting, but I propose that we agree the minutes of the last meeting. Do I have a seconder? Okay. Could you register your agreement or otherwise with that, please? Do you agree? Hands up if you're happy with that. Just to make sure. Thank you very much. Action sheet. Are there any outstanding actions, Jonathan, from that you want to?
Chair, I'd really just refer members to the amendment sheet, which confirms that the actions that are listed have been undertaken. So regarding the request for appeal decisions, those were provided to the individual members who asked for those, and also with regard to the enforcement report, the report which was published as part of the agenda for the DCA committee on the 6th of March, has been included as part of an updated enforcement report under agenda item 12 for this meeting, and this is also together with a list of the enforcement notices that have been served.
Thanks. And it's a very helpful report. If some of you, I do suggest that you read that in depth, because it gives you an idea of the situation that enforcement function is in currently, the challenges it faces, and the measures being put in place to improve things. So I recommend that to you. Richard, I apologise.
To be fair, you largely said what I was going to say, Chairman. The Chief Planner is to be congratulated, in my view. Members have been concerned about enforcement practice for some time, but this gives not just the raw details but of enforcement notices, but it gives context, and I think that's important. We know we've had a problem, but in my view we are moving in the right direction now.
Thank you. It's excellent. Please pass on our thanks to officers for that report. Appeals. Can I hand over now to you, Jonathan, for the appeals? If there's anything you'd like to highlight, and then I'll ask members if there are any questions on particular ones that they'd like to ask.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In terms of the list of appeals under agenda item 11, I don't believe there's anything particularly of note just to highlight in terms of decisions that have been received, but I will be happy to take any questions, and also, if any members would like any copies of any decisions, we'll be happy to provide those after.
Thank you. Any questions on specific appeals from any members? No? Thank you very much. And we move on to enforcement.
So in terms of enforcement, as I mentioned, in terms of the report that's been provided this afternoon, it will be noted by the committee that there are 2 notices that have been served. The details of those are listed, and as I said, there is now an update report which is attached to this, which provides an update on the overall situation with regards to planning enforcement activity. And it is our intention to essentially provide this on a regular basis to members and update it to provide that insight.
Thank you. Fabian?
Thank you, Chair. On the cases registered versus notices served table, it seems to suggest that, we're now looking at 1%. Last year it was 2.77% having notices served. Is that because most of the, is that a resource issue or is that something else?
Well, there has been a resource issue kind of within that area, but I think that, something will be noted from the update as of the 13th of June is that there's been a real effort by the team just to close down historic cases. So there's been a lot of work there that's done on the enforcement backlog, and particularly in terms of doing those initial assessments and kind of triaging and where harm isn't identified or it isn't expedient to take action, closing those cases. So that will obviously influence the overall kind of numbers that you're seeing there.
Thank you. That's it. Okay, great. We only have one item on the agenda today. That is Premier Business Park, Sussex Street, Bristol, BS2 ORA 0RA. And I'll move to the public forum. And we should have a roving microphone up there. There it is. And the first person on my list for statements, and I apologise in advance for mispronunciation of names. Please correct me. Willie Harbinson, Old Market Community Association.
Hello. Right. The Old Market Community Association strongly supports this application. The proposal falls within the Old Market Quarter Neighbourhood Development Plan area. Our community group spent several years compiling the plan, Bristol's First. It was not written by council officers, but by members of the local community, endorsed by planning policy officers and approved by councillors. We cannot understand why the planning officers stating this proposal conflicts with our plan and why they have not asked our group for a meeting about the application. This proposal aligns with our plan, which supports development that brings active frontage to Kingsland Road to reflect its role as a primary pedestrian route. It will transform a soulless street into an active place. The developers' community engagement has been excellent. They've responded to our request to provide valuable and sustainable community assets, including maker workshops at a peppercorn rent. Please support our community by approving this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Nola Hersey, Chair of Dings Community Association.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Excellent. So as you said, my name is Nola Hersey. I represent the Dings Community Association, and we are also in support of this application. As a small, vibrant community on the edge of Temple Quarter, our residents have understandable concerns about the impact of significant change occurring in this area. As part of this change, Dominus is the only developer who has undertaken a proper, what we would refer to as a model stakeholder consultation. They've actively worked with us to produce a design that will help foster positive relationships and benefits for existing and new residents. The proposed scheme incorporates a community space, a community liaison person, a safer way to cross Kingsland Road, and importantly for many of our residents, access to an affordable supermarket. An industrial unit on this site will provide no obvious community benefit, but instead brings the risk of increased traffic, pollution, noise and congestion. We support this properly consulted proposal and ask you to support the wishes of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Saoirse Young, Manager, Bristol Hub.
Good afternoon. As you said, I'm Saoirse Young and I'm the manager of Bristol Hub, a local branch at the national charity Student Hubs. We fully support this application. Student Hubs get students at university to volunteer to do good things in their host communities, including helping literacy, numeracy and ICT skills. We have worked across Bristol for over 12 years and have worked with more than 100 community partners. In a community like the Dings, where many residents' first language is not English, this can be really helpful to support adults seeking employment and children to do their homework. It also helps break down barriers between students and their neighbours. It is really valuable that Dominus has committed to building and managing a fully funded community centre to be used precisely in this way. Having seen the benefits of helping students and local residents to get to know each other, we are excited to see what they can take on in this collaborative approach to community social action. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Chiswell-Jones.
Good afternoon, my name is Catherine Chiswell-Jones and I'm representing Artspace Lifespace. The Invisible Circus is a key cultural institution in Bristol. Space is vital for support and performance opportunities locally and nationally, and it is integral to Bristol's cultural landscape. Unit 15 is a valuable resource recognised not just nationally but internationally, and so it contributes significantly to our economy here in Bristol with numerous performances and jobs both on a Bristol and a national scale. While we acknowledge the economic benefits to the Dings, including 77 full-time jobs, affordable makerspaces, we are concerned that more student accommodation at the expense of creative space risks eroding Bristol's creative core. Losing Unit 15 means losing the capacity to develop specialist aerial acts, risking Bristol's reputation as a circus city. Our members at the island have said that it will diminish Bristol's variety of circus artists, that there will be no space to rehearse speciality aerial acts, and it is highlighted that it is one of the few spaces for large equipment training outside of London. Bristol prides itself on being a circus city, but with these facilities under threat, so is our reputation. We urge Dominus to incorporate the training facilities that are currently provided by Unit 15 into their plans to preserve this essential cultural resource.
Thank you. Public forum speakers have 1 minute. I'll be a little generous today because we haven't got too many, but by and large it's 1 minute. Thank you. Councillor Yassin Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. I will echo what they said. Our residents include all the Marketing Association and also the Dings residents and the local organizations. What I'm saying is as elected member of the Lawrence Hill Ward, and also as you are elected, everyone committee sitting today, you should have to reflect yourself. So everyone who voted for us needs respect. So these residents needs respect, and what they need is what they offering at the moment, these developers. So what I'm asking you, every single person of this committee, to support this project. And I will echo again what they said, our colleagues and residents, and ended my support of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicola Accourt-Stewart? Not present. All public forum statements have been circulated to all of the members on the committee, by the way, so if someone's not present, that still the comment has been taken into account by members on the committee. Emma Harvey? Melissa Blackburn?
Hello, my name is Melissa Blackburn. I am a senior producer at the University of the West of England. I'm co-chair of Art Space, Life Space, and I'm here to talk about the Unit 15, in particular, an Invisible Circus. We're very concerned that removing Invisible Circus from the long-term tenancy at Unit 15 in the heart of the city will have a long-term detrimental effect on the creative, cultural and economic growth of Bristol. In order for us to continue to attract new businesses across the city and attract new creative industries into the city, the city needs to actively maintain mixed-use areas. I understand this is a mixed-use area, but this has this building that we need to get rid of for this new encampment is specifically for the circus. So the city needs to attractively maintain mixed-use areas for the city that have real heritage and cultural interest, rather than homogenising them into flats and offices. As we sit at a transitional moment for the life of the country and the region, we should do what Bristol does best and recognise the world-class, award-winning creative industries in Bristol. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Doug Francis, Creative Director, Invisible Circus, CIC.
Hello. What we were hoping for was a more pioneering and progressive approach to this development that might change how these proposals are not only appraised in planning, but designed and delivered in process. One that would bring all parties to the table and build these developments more directly with and around the creative communities that sit at the heart of them. It feels like this could and should be achievable, especially in a city like Bristol. Bristol City Council Cultural Strategy states that the shortfall in arts funding needs to be supported by private investment. Dominus have a strong ethos of social value. They have been sympathetic and helpful to our cause in many ways, and additionally they have now offered us a longer-term position on the site within the maker spaces. It is only unfortunate that this is not entirely suitable to circus. Bristol is a city with a long history of arts and culture, whose current economic regeneration has been fuelled by this, making it one of the fastest growing metro city centres in Europe. These shared aspirations are written within policies and statements from both sides supporting culture and a more collaborative approach, but no one seems able to build the bridge required to make these connections tangible. We have maintained a neutral stance to reflect our position between these two currently opposing forces.
Can I ask you to bring it to a close, please?
In an attempt to remedy and inspire change. We hope this is not all too little too late, as any offers of support are only useful if we are still in business and operating in this city, which as yet is still uncertain.
Thank you. Steve Crompton, Changing Social.
Afternoon, councillors. My name is Steve Crompton, Managing Director of a company called Changing Social. 5 years ago, I returned to Bristol, which is my hometown, and I planned to start a business. I moved back from London and I had no money. I had to move back in with my parents to start the company, and in order to grow, I had to find maker and creator space. 5 years later, we're still in Bristol. We now employ 45 people, and we've just secured private equity for over £1.5 million in funding backed by the British Business Bank. We plan to grow the company by 200 people over the next 3 years. And again, this would not have been possible without the maker and creator space that we first moved into when I moved back home. The planning application, I understand, proposes to add another 10,000 square feet of similar spaces that can be used by local entrepreneurs. I'm passionate about supporting local business and entrepreneurs as well, similar to myself, and that's why I passionately support this application. Bristol really does have a creative community, including those starting up in all sorts of businesses and those non-for-profits. We don't need large industrial warehouses, but we do need spaces like this to support Bristol enterprise.
Thank you. Preet Ahlawalia, Principal Director, Dominus.
Good afternoon, councillors.
Afternoon.
I'm Preet Ahlawalia, a member of the owning family of Dominus. My father arrived in the UK as a refugee, and he always appreciated the sanctuary that the UK gave him. So when we started our family business, he always sought to give back. That's why we start our developments by asking the community what they need most, and incorporating that into our business plan. The Amazing Things community asked for a funded community space, supermarket, road safety improvements, and maker spaces. We included all of them. We're the first developer in Bristol, as far as I know, to offer 20% discount to our student rooms, and the affordable workspace offered at a peppercorn rent. We have received 27 planning applications positively throughout the UK and are currently on site on 10 different schemes across the UK, including in Bristol. If you approve our application, you have my absolute commitment. I will work with the officers to address anything you wish to condition. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cormac Farrelly, Director, Alfred Hall, Monaghan Morris. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I'm a Bristol Director of H&M Architects. We're urban design specialists. Working collaboratively with the community on this scheme has been truly rewarding. It's a great design, made all the better for their input. We had glowing feedback from your advisory design panel, Design West, and the university's own design architect praised the scheme, particularly for its pastoral care. So it's very frustrating to get a late objection from your design officers who wouldn't meet us and got a lot of facts wrong, and who clearly misinterpreted or haven't fully read the document submitted. This is one of our best schemes. It will reinstate the historic Henry Street as a public space, create a varied streetscape, sat well in its setting, and enliven this fenced-off industrial estate. It was really pleasing to hear Bristol architect Willie Harbison support the application. I really hope you can too.
Thank you. Michael Orr, Planning Partner, Rapley's.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Michael of Rapley's. Good afternoon, councillors. As a former planning officer at Bristol City Council and now a consultant, I have more than 30 years' experience under my belt. I'm frankly baffled as why officers are recommending you refuse this application. You've just heard from numerous community groups strongly argue that they want it approved. In my view, members have been put in an avoidable and invidious position of having to choose between officers and the community. From a planning policy perspective, I think all 9 reasons for refusal could be set aside or dealt with by condition. You should, in my opinion, approve this application. Bristol has got many great schemes that officers did not support, and members did. The fabulous Serpentine Castle Bridge is one of them, and it now features in your urban design, urban living SPD. I don't want to appear adversarial, and have a great deal of respect for a case officer, but in my professional opinion, officers have simply got this case wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jay Ahluwalia, Principal Director, Dominus.
Is that?
You're on, yes.
It's on now. Hopefully we can start the minute from now.
Yeah.
I'm Jay Ahluwalia, Preet's brother and part of the family that owns Dominus. It's been a real pleasure collaborating with the Dings Community Association and the Old Market Community Association to agree what community assets we'll deliver. And I really thank them for their time, ideas and support through the process. I also want to thank Invisible Circus for working with us in a constructive way. It's difficult to overstate the amazingly positive impact the Temple Quarter regeneration will have on Bristol, but change also presents challenges, including the potential displacement of existing occupiers. And so to support Invisible Circus, we've extended their lease, we've stopped charging them rent since last September, we've hired an agent to find them a new home, and proposed to lease the makerspaces rent-free for 20 years so they can secure their future generally, but also have that be one that's in Bristol. Most objections to our application are from people concerned about the Invisible Circus's future, and many of them are actually from overseas. I hope you agree that we're doing all that we can reasonably do to help secure that. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of the public forum, and so I'll ask Ben to give the officer presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for the demolition of existing structures on an industrial site in the east of Kingsland Road principal warehousing and industrial area, and the construction of a new mixed-use development comprising 705 student beds in purpose-built student accommodation with flexible retail or light industrial space, referred to throughout the documentation as a supermarket or a food shop, flexible light industrial uses, which are referred to as maker spaces, and a designated community space, along with some public realm works and the introduction of a new or reinstated pedestrian street, now called New Henry Street. So the application has been called in by the Ward Councillor Mohammed, as you've heard, in the event that officers are minded to refuse the scheme, and that is our recommendation in this instance. There have been 584 public representations on this application, of which 8 are in support, 10 are neutral, and 565 are objecting. The site is located in the Piwa, as I mentioned, and is surrounded by low-rise industrial buildings to the north, east and south. To the west is the residential area known as the Dings, which is characterised by 2-storey terraced housing and runs up to the opposite side of Kingsland Road. The Piwa is retained in the local plan and the emerging local plan due to the de-designation of the Piwa land in St Phillips, and to allow the regeneration of Temple Quarter. The remaining Piwa land in and around the centre of Bristol is considered to have increased importance for retaining employment in the city. The site is currently in use by multiple operators, including industrial spaces, the vibrant community and cultural spaces that are consistent with the Piwa, and include, as you've heard, the Invisible Circus and training centre and music studios. I think I've got my slides slightly mixed up. The site, here we go. The site is currently in this form. You can see some of these existing site photos with relatively low-rise industrial units here, if my cursor is showing, which it is, and then the residential properties opposite on Kingsland Road, and then some more views from inside the Piwa, and again from the opposing corner. So we have here some images taken from some of the documentation supporting the application. The top left shows the proposed development, the top left shows the existing development, and the bottom right shows the proposed development. So you can see development 4 to 6 stories along Kingsland Road, and then rising up to 8 stories further into the development and by Alfred Street. So the key issues on the application were land use. The site is within the Piwa and it is intended to be safeguarded for industrial or distribution use in the existing and local plan. The proposed ground floor uses compete with Old Markets Town Centre, and development would harm the future viability of the rest of the Piwa, which is seeing increasing demand, as mentioned, due to the redevelopment in Temple Quarter. It is acknowledged that the site is earmarked in the Old Market Neighbourhood Plan as a potential long-term development site, subject to it meeting 3 criteria, that being that it's on the periphery of the Piwa, which it is, that it's predominantly commercial when it's 93.5% residential, and that it would offer a suitable standard of amenity for future occupants, and in this instance we don't believe it would. In terms of design and heritage, the proposal is simply considered too large, and the scheme is considered an overdevelopment of the site, and the design could be improved. And in terms of amenity, the proposal would harm the amenity of the existing residents on the opposite side of Kingsland Road and offer poor amenity for the future occupants of the student accommodation. And then in terms of transport, the scheme is considered unsafe with regard to highway safety, impacts on parking, and insufficient evidence that the issues raised can be resolved at a site that's not considered to be a sustainable location for a development such as this or on this scale. Of the key consultees on this application, strong objections have been raised by urban design officers with regard to the scale and massing of development, arrangement of the amenity spaces, flexible commercial and industrial spaces, livability and amenity for future occupants. Transport officers have raised concerns regarding highway safety, particularly with regard to access onto and across the highway for vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists. They've also objected with regard to the impact on excessive parking in the area and the safety of the proposed loading bays. The suggestion to double yellow lines in the roads around the development would harm the viability of neighbouring businesses and organisations. The application also fails to demonstrate safe alternative provision for sustainable transport, such as sufficient cycle storage in accordance with the Council's guidelines. Since submitting the officer's report, the applicant has submitted additional information regarding sustainability, specifically regarding overheating and the site's ability to achieve BREEAM excellent status. Sustainability officers have provided an initial view, but the information was submitted too late for full comments to be presented to us. Concerns do remain regarding overheating, cooling mechanisms and contradictions with regard to mechanical ventilation requirements between the energy reports and noise impact mitigation reports, but this is something that we have had some positive movement on. In terms of the ground floor layout or the street layout, the proposed flexible retail commercial unit is located to the southwest corner, again opposite the residential properties on Kingsland Road, on this corner. The community space is located on the northwest corner, but it would provide little active frontage behind the rubble stone walls of the bridge, which comes in along here. The remainder of Kingsland Road frontage would be a mix of 2 small commercial spaces and 3 bin stores, shown here and here. A proposed new pedestrian crossing, originally proposed to be here, has been removed. That would have linked the site to the alleyway to the Dings. That was removed due to safety concerns. The remaining crossing would be located on a false raised table directly opposite existing residential units at the junction with Sussex Street. Given the direction of travel and the number of people using this crossing frequently, the transport team are not satisfied that this is safe. Also of note is the location of the bike store, which is located at the back of development, next door to the community space. To access this, cyclists arriving by road would have to come around the site through the entirety of the proposed new development and then turn left to access the cycle store. This is considered poorly located. Further, the link to the cycle path to the north is a stepped access. This means that cyclists would need to dismount and carry their bikes up and down the stairs to access the cycle route or to use a runnel. This is also objected to, and given the size and location of the development, a level access to the cycle path was advised, but was not brought forward. The remaining frontages along Sussex Street and Alfred Street are proposed as flexible uses, as light industrial or maker spaces. Concern has been raised by design officers with regard to these units providing active frontage and whether or not the businesses that operate it will want it, and also from transport regarding the issues around parking for visitors or potential customers and servicing with a lack of sufficient parking and loading areas. Of particular note is the makerspace located in the middle of the development here, which is quite a distance from any of the vehicular accesses, so there'd be concerns as to how that unit would be able to operate if it was in light industrial use. Access to the development for students would be through New Henry Street, and then there will be a singular entrance under a bridge that hosts the first floor amenity space. This is 2/3 of the way up New Henry Street, and concern is raised with regards to how far this is from the existing streets and vehicles, and whether or not this presents issues for people that are mobility impaired. Access to the cluster flats, studios and townhouses is via the main entrance under here and then up to the first floor, which is shown here. Access to the rooms fronting Alfred Street here is through all of the amenity space proposed for the students. Access to rooms on Kingsland Road block and the townhouses require people to come up New Henry Street, up these flights of stairs and then back out of the building into the courtyard to access the rooms here. As such, it's considered that the layout is poor and requires students to walk, in many cases, excessive amounts of distance to reach their rooms, particularly on the extremities of the site. Just some quick drawings of the elevation. So this is the elevation fronting Kingsland Road, which is between 4 and 6 stories. This is the elevation for Sussex Street. As you turn into the P-word, that will be the view on your left-hand side. And again, it goes from the 4 up to 8 stories. The block on the right goes higher further into the site, but at that particular point, it is 6 stories. The east elevation is fronting Alfred Street, so this is looking out from inside the P-word at between 6 and 8 stories again. And then that's the view from the Dings Railway Path, which will be less impactful because it's lower down. And then we have some TVI imagery. So this is on the approach down from Old Market as you approach Kingsland, the bridge onto Kingsland Road. This is the view from inside the Dings at the other end of the alley to the site. and this is the view coming up from Temple Quarter, approaching the site on the right-hand side. So the scheme does offer some benefits, and we acknowledge that. The benefits include the use of the maker spaces at Peppercorn Rent, the 20% of student accommodation being offered at reduced rent, although it wouldn't be considered affordable in policy terms. And further, 705 student rooms equates to 282 new dwellings, which we have to consider in terms of the tilted balance requirement within the city, as we currently don't meet our 4-year housing land supply. The applicants also set out benefits that include the introduction of a supermarket, community space and maker spaces. And as set out in the report, given the issues with regard to competition with Old Market Town Centre, the recently opened supermarket on the other side of the Dings, and the loss of the existing community and cultural spaces and employment land, which equate to more than is being offered with this scheme, these are not considered by officers to be benefits. So when weighing up the benefits against all of the concerns and issues raised, the conclusion is that the scheme should be refused, and that is our recommendation to committee. And the refusal reasons are set out in full in our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. It's time now for members' questions, and so what I will do is I will note your names down in order of hands going up. I may make an occasional mistake, but we'll start with Richard. Councillor Eddy,
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 questions to the case officer and one to Bip Housen on the transport issues. Ben, we've heard from Willie Hartingham in public forum, one of the original instigators of the neighbourhood plan, that he and his organisation had no contact from yourselves. So is it the case that you're asserting that this application falls against the neighbourhood plan on your interpretation, or why have we not communicated with them?
I think in essence we have given kind of full regard to the status of the Old Market neighbourhood plan in the assessment. It is addressed in the report. We appreciate the difference of view that's been expressed, and have also noted the comments that we've received in that regard. But I think, a particular area of focus is policy B5 within that plan, which deals with the principal industrial and warehousing areas. That's the PWA acronym that everyone would have just been hearing. And really, in the report we have considered that policy and assessed the proposal against it, and we do find that there is conflict.
So you're effectively saying it's your interpretation, you're ignoring the views of the local community. My second question to Ben, on climate change, energy and sustainability, you mentioned the latex supply of the information. Is this not a conditionable thing? We can grant consent if members are minded for this, subject to satisfactory information.
Okay, so if I can just add something to your previous question. The policy itself states that within PWA, principal industrial and warehousing areas defined on the map that is shown, proposals for developments involving the provision of residential or other non-industrial uses will only be permitted where the site is located on the perimeter of the area so designated, which in this case it is, where the use remains predominantly commercial, in this case it's 93.5% residential, and where it can be shown that a satisfactory standard of amenity would be provided for any residential occupiers, which it isn't. So it's not that we're not listening to the objectors. The policy is there, and we have to interpret that policy as such, which is what we've done in this instance. With regards to the second question, we have had some movement. As I said, we've had some late submissions of revised energy statements. We had on Monday morning overheating assessment that came in. and further revision of the energy statement, which we haven't been able to assess in full in advance of committee. But as a result, and a BREEAM pre-assessment report, which did satisfy one of our concerns. So we, in the amendment sheet report that I did, we amended that refusal reason to take out concern with policy BCS 15, because that now can be dealt with by condition. It's possible that the sustainability issue could be resolved by condition, but given the other issues that we have, our recommendation would still be a refusal because of the design, transport, and land use issues.
And my third issue, Ben, is I'm perplexed by the dichotomy between urban design's criticisms and the fact that Design West, which is quite creatively on board regarding this proposal. So how can you explain that difference, that vast difference in their approach?
So my understanding is that the most recent Design West review related to an earlier iteration of this scheme that was due to come to committee and then withdrawn. The new application is slightly revised, with the southwest corner being reduced by 1 storey to slightly reduce the impact on the properties on Kingsland Road, but is now taller along either side of New Henry Street. And concern had been raised previously about the height and scale of the development, and it is now taller than at the last review stage by those panels. So with every application, our design officers will provide comment and review. These were reported back through the application agent. We set out our concerns, and we were advised that they wanted this to go to committee in its current form and didn't want to negotiate in terms of the height and scale.
My final question is to Pip. Pip, highways have significant criticisms of this scheme, of course. Though I understand the applicant commissioned an independent road safety panel and audit, and the response was quite positive. This is a car-free scheme, traffic calming is proposed, and a pedestrian crossing. So I'm intrigued that highways is quite so scathing in its judgment.
I've brought Jane with me today because she has been with this scheme all along, and I think she's best placed to respond to you in terms of the value of that safety audit. And actually, what I can generally talk about what our overall concerns are, but she's more on the details. So if you'd like that now, I'm going to hand over to Jane.
Thank you. The road safety audit actually did identify a number of issues. One of them was the crossing, the proposed crossing that has been mentioned, and it proposed that the crossing should be taken out. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with the mic. So the crossing has now been removed because of safety concerns to do with that. So what we have now is essentially the traffic calming on Kingsland Road, will essentially be a dropped curb with a build out between some parked cars as a crossing point away from the desire line, and some different coloured surfacing at the junction. There were other concerns from the road safety audit which haven't quite been addressed yet. Some of them could be left till detailed design, but there are a couple of elements that weren't. And also the road safety audit didn't consider the change of use of the area, so it considered the scheme itself as a standalone. But yes, there were, even though it was car-free, the trip generation still showed 443 trips in a day. So it doesn't remove car use, and there's a lot of pedestrian and cycling use that needs to be considered.
Okay, thank you. Guy, next.
Thank you, Chair. Begging your indulgence, I do have some questions. I would just like to make a very short statement before I do. Is that okay? Apologies, I missed the very start of the meeting.
Depends how very short it is.
Very short, Chair, okay. I promise. I will read it rather than go off on one.
Is it your statement, your personal statement?
It doesn't express a personal view, if that's what you're asking. It's a statement from me, yes, rather than a question.
So it is your personal view?
It might be easier if I just make it, Chair. I think this conversation's gone on longer.
I will certainly stop you if you're reading someone else's
Pertains to
statement in the middle of the councillor questions, but if it's your personal view, you may continue.
Thank you, Chair. Just in the interests of transparency and everything else, I would like it just to make clear to the committee, as I think all of us have, been contacted by the developer in this case. I was asked, as someone who attends the agenda conference, to raise the possibility of the members of this committee having a private briefing from the developer on this. As it happened, when we went to the agenda conference, the issue was raised anyway, as a matter of course. However, in correspondence from the developer mentioned that other members of the committee had already received a briefing. And at that meeting, a decision was made not to have a briefing for all members, despite my view that we should, and that's normal, that happens. Because of that, I raised a concern with the head of planning. Members of the committee have now subsequently provided clarifications. A document has been circulated and, I believe, published that encompasses any information that has been provided to members in private briefings prior to this. And as I say, I do not feel I have any sort of prejudicial interest. My mind is open. To be honest, Chair, I'm more worried that my mind won't be closed by the end of this meeting than it is that it's not sufficiently open at the start. However, I did think it was important, in the interest of transparency, in the interests of being open and honest with members of the public, to make that statement. Apologies, I would have done it at the start of the meeting, but I was getting advice from the head of planning at the time. I hope that's okay. If you want to go to other members for questions and come back to me, that would be fine, or I can continue.
That's fine. Please continue your questions.
Okay, but first question, Chair, I'm afraid it's for yourself. In terms of the process that will follow to make a decision on this specific case, there is a protocol at the start of all papers to planning committees now that lays out the process for a decision-making. That is to say that the Chair will move a motion in line with the officer's recommendation, and then if it falls, then the Chair will move a motion to defer.
This is laid out in the papers, yes?
It is laid out in the papers. However, there is a slight ambiguity stemming from the training that all members were given just a few weeks ago as to whether that second motion to defer, if the first recommendation falls, applies when the officer's recommendation is to refuse as well as to grant. I was hoping to get clarification from yourself in this case. If the officer's recommendation were to fall, would you automatically move a motion to defer, or would the protocol continue as written in the papers, that it then is it's open to members?
Jeremy will clarify, but I think it's clear from as laid out in the papers and public papers as well.
Yes, there is a flow chart at the back of the agenda sheet, which actually explains how the procedures work in this instance. And where you have an instance where there is a recommendation for approval and the committee wishes to go to refuse that, then the protocol that you talk about would apply, and that would be a request for a deferral by the Chair, and that would be tested with the committee. That doesn't apply in reverse. So if the committee doesn't wish to go ahead with the officer's recommendation to refuse, then there's no requirement under the convention for the Chair to move deferral and test it with the committee. It doesn't mean to say that couldn't happen. It doesn't mean to say that somebody may wish to defer it or make any decision, but the convention doesn't expect it to happen. Hopefully that clarifies the situation.
With your permission, Chairman, could I confirm the veracity of what Mr. Livett is saying? As I chaired DCA committee for 3 years until this May, I believe over the 3 years there were almost 9 or 10 cases where the officers recommended refusal, but we actually didn't support that, and we approved those often obviously subject to conditions to be drawn up, of course, but there isn't a requirement in response to Councillor Porney to defer.
Yes, I was explaining that there's no expectation for the chair to do it. That's the point I was making. It doesn't mean to say that the chair may choose to do so or the committee may choose to do so, but there's no expectation that there is under the convention that's set out in the papers that if it was the other way round, the chair would call for a deferral.
That's great. Thank you very much for the clarification, Chair. And final question for me for the time being would just be, in terms of the test that the officer outlined for the 3 criteria that need to be overcome in order for the local plan to take precedence over the other elements of the current local plan, as you said, just make sure I'm...
You're referring the local plan as opposed to the neighbourhood development plan?
Yes, exactly. Oh, sorry, I said the wrong way around. Yes, that's what I meant. It was in relation to the test for substantially commercial. As the officer said, that the test that it's on the periphery is met. Are we questioning the amenity as well? Is that subject to challenge? In other words, is the test that's not met, from the officer's point of view, solely that one of predominantly commercial?
No, the test is in 3 parts. So yes, it is on the periphery of the principal industrial warehousing area. It is not predominantly commercial. It's 93% residential. And it doesn't offer satisfactory amenity for future occupants. Now, that's for a variety of reasons, one of which is the fact that the amenity space is unlikely to get the ground floor amenity space is unlikely to get sufficient daylight and sunlight for the vast majority of the time students are in residence.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of that second test then, could I check the comparison that's been done by yourself, the comparison of square footage of what's currently there to the proposed scheme, is that test outlined in law? Is it precedent? In other words, is there an alternative test that could be? For example, if in a similar situation, if a single warehouse, 1 unit, were demolished to make way for, say, 12 maker units, one could claim that that's 1,200% increase. Equally, you could talk about bed spaces related to jobs created. Is that test concrete and required, or is there flexibility in making that determination?
Well, in this instance, there would be an overall loss of employment space as well as the additional student accommodation above. So there, whichever way we look at it, there is a reduction in the amount of employment space, and the uses or the uses of the spaces that are being offered will be severely limited by the size compared to the existing development.
So, but just for confirmation then, looking at the statistics as outlined in the report, a comparison of how much employment space there is currently relative to how much employment space there will be if this were granted, you end up with a net loss of 20-something%. In other words, if one were so minded, could make the case that the new development involves a relatively minor loss of employment space, and that as a result, the development as proposed is substantially commercial. Do you see what I mean?
I'm not entirely clear, so I'm going to try and rephrase what I said. The space at the moment is in use for a variety of businesses. The development as proposed would see the existing site demolished and some industrial uses or light industrial uses on the ground floor. That would be a significant reduction in the amount of employment space that we have at the present. The other thing to factor in is that the addition of this much residential and the taller elements within the PWA are also likely to prejudice the future development of the PWA, the future vitality and functionality of the PWA, because you would have a large student development on the corner going into the site. You would then, if the buildings on the other side were to come forward for industrial use or development, have additional concerns with regards to noise, air pollution, odour. So again, this development would actually harm the future viability and vitality of the PWA. So we have to consider that as well.
Thank you. Paula, did you have your hand up?
I've got loads of questions and I'm just trying to streamline them, so I know you'll get cross with me if I ask too many. The first one I'd like to ask is, could you please go back and reiterate what you said about the tilted balance? I didn't quite pick it up and I'm not sure I fully understood it, about the 705 student accommodations and how that reacts to what you mentioned another number and then you mentioned the tilted balance.
So, yeah, essentially the background to that is because the City Council is not able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply against its current targets. The tilted balance is engaged, and therefore there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. Student accommodation is relevant to the tilted balance because it can equate to essentially an equivalent provision of dwelling houses for housing completion purposes.
I think it was 282. It's 2.5 student places equals 1 dwelling.
Point now, thank you. I suppose to sort of summarise a lot, I'm trying to synthesise some of the questions. I've got issues with, if you read the crime report, the transport report, the point about the section 106. A lot of these things do seem to be issues that could be seen in a more positive light. So, for example, the crime report, it's acting as if there's never going to be any development there, and that students are going to be walking around in the dark and like some Victorian street, and they're going to be, they're going to have their purses stolen. But surely, when the development is there will be a very different atmosphere, and therefore, I just sort of doubted the authorial intent in a way of that. And that goes with the section 106 too. I mean, we're still chasing up the section 106 for the zoo, which was given planning approval nearly a year ago. So I know that these things can be sorted out afterwards. So a lot of these things do seem to be quite negative. And this whole thing about the lengths of walks for students. I've just got a lot of questions about that, and I don't really know that they're going to be answered today. I know that I'm sure that you've got questions. I'm not going to ask the questions that I think you're going to ask. So I'll leave it for that for the moment, and if I might come back and see what other people have asked.
You're welcome. Thank you, Fabian.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a question about invisible circuits, but I think the public forum's answered that. A few questions I did have is that if there's only one entrance to the student accommodation, what about fire risk? Because it was basically so that one entrance on the ground floor, that's it to all 705 rooms. Is that correct?
That is correct. There is only one entrance, but there are fire escapes around the development. So in the event of an emergency evacuation, there are additional fire escapes. The Health and Safety Executive Fire Safety Team have reviewed the application and confirmed that they believe in planning terms they don't object, although there may be issues to be resolved under building regulations. But in planning terms, they do not object to this application.
Okay. The other thing that did trouble me in the report was saying that some rooms would be permanently too cold, or they'd be permanently too hot, or some of the open space would be permanently in the shade. Could you please show me and show us on the plans which rooms or which parts of the open space were affected?
Yeah, so I don't remember, in all honesty, those exact words. Right. So the concern came from sustainability that rooms that are on the higher floors and south-facing. So if I try, I'm definitely having some issues with the second screen today. I apologise. So, for example, the south-facing rooms, particularly the higher floors, they're going to get a lot of sunlight. And at the same time, their windows are going to have to be closed during the weekends and at night due to the noise from the Dare 2 nightclub, which is next door. So in order to protect that existing venue with agent of change principles, we have to ensure that residents of this scheme will need to be informed prior to taking out a room that they will have noise issues and they will not be able to open their windows And if they do, they are not able to complain about that business. So that was, again, one of our concerns with regards to the amenity impact, because people have to choose between having an open window or being kept awake at night. And that was one of the issues. In terms of too cold, if you go to the north side, for example, and the rooms on the inside of the courtyard, so just trying to work out how this moves. There we go. So, for example, rooms that are north-facing inside the courtyard or don't get any natural sunlight, there were concerns about the heating there. We did get an overheating report in on Monday morning, which hasn't had the chance to be fully assessed. I am aware from an initial review that they did make a conclusion that it would be acceptable, but only one floor was modelled, and we don't know which floor that was. So if it was a lower floor, it's likely that the overheating will have been understated, and the cooling requirement will be overstated, and vice versa for the upper floor. So that's something that has yet to be fully clarified. But again, given the other issues that we have with the scheme, we don't think that's a reason to hold up the committee.
And back to the issue of which areas would not get sunlight. So the one open courtyard is basically on the first floor, and then there's two bits under the bridge, a ground floor. So what happens about natural light in those?
So the daylight sunlight analysis and drawings are all on the file, so they are accessible for everyone to look at. The main concerns are that because of the orientation of the site, and particularly for this bridge, the courtyard up here will get almost no sunlight during the winter. This one will have restricted light, and the courtyard here, which is at 2 levels, the lower level will get almost no light at any time, and the courtyard at the top, I think from memory, the daylight sunlight analysis said it wouldn't hit the BRE minimum requirement at the 21st of March. It would do so a couple of weeks later and be acceptable during the summer. But then we also have the noise impact assessment saying that the impact of the nightclub isn't a problem because the students won't be there in the summer. So effectively, having to look at all of this information, which is why I said that there are some inconsistencies that we would need to iron out in order to get a full level playing field, is that the amenity space here, it doesn't get enough natural light. It will be quite cold and miserable for much of the year.
And just to be clear, the time when it would be actually quite pleasant would be when the students are at home anyway, during the summer break. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Further questions? Lisa.
Hello, thanks very much, Councillor. Just a quick couple of questions. I was just more interested in the space of the accommodation, the unit spacing. So first of all, can you just clarify or just tell me, because I couldn't find it in the documents, I must have missed it, what are the unit spaces?
In terms of the density?
No, not in terms of density, actually in terms of the unit space. So for example, are they, basically we're looking at the minimum space density, the national, it's better if I just read it from here instead of trying to remember it. The national space standards per unit for one person, one person, one bed.
So the national described space standards apply to dwellings, not to student accommodation. So in that respect, the minimum will be 37 square metres, which is for a single person, one bedroom apartment. That doesn't apply to student accommodation. So we don't assess it on that basis. We have to make sure that the rooms are livable. But it is of a scale that would be considered acceptable in terms of a private room for a student accommodation. Most of the rooms provide ensuite bathrooms. They've got a desk, bedroom, communal space for the cluster flats. So in that respect, if I think the question, if you want to know about the densities, it's calculated at 849 beds per hectare.
849, yeah, I thought that as well. That was my second question. That's great. Thank you very much. And the other question was, what's the percentage of accessible actual dwellings? So, I think it's M43.
So, just on the hectare point, yeah, 849 beds per hectare, which is slightly, just to give you a comparison of the area as well. Some of the developments in Temple Quarter have exceeded that. But again, that's in Temple Quarter where higher densities are expected, not in Old Market, which isn't part of the regeneration area. So to give you a comparable number, the recent development at Unity Street is at 647 beds per hectare, and that's a combined co-living student development, so this is significantly higher. In terms of the accessibility, I believe there are 4 wheelchair accessible rooms, which is 0.6%. There are 7 adaptable rooms and 3 rooms adaptable for assisted use. So yeah, 1% of rooms are adaptable and 0.6% are wheelchair accessible.
Okay, all right. That's it, thanks.
Thank you. Further questions? Okay, thank you. Oh, Paula?
Yeah, it's another question. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer it, but I'm concerned about the future use of these space-making spaces with residential. So in my mind, I'm imagining somebody coming along and deciding that they're going to set up as a, I don't know, as a blacksmith or something. And so noxious fumes, all of these sort of things, and it's underneath student bedrooms. Is there legislation about that, or is there any? I mean, in the end, is it going to not be viable because somebody wants to do something that's not just something very artisan and lovely, but actually might be dirty?
So I did speak to our air quality consultant or air quality officer and raised this particular concern, not just about the potential of the maker spaces, but the other uses in the PWA and uses that might come forward. Their view is that it's something that could be conditioned and managed already because of the noise issues. The windows have to be shut at night and through the weekend because the neighbouring site has outdoor music events that run to 7 a.m. and then through the day in the weekend. So we have to assess it on the current situation, and that is that at present, no further mitigation is required for air quality purposes, given that there is mechanical ventilation which is required. If that mechanical ventilation was to need to be increased, then that would obviously have effects on the sustainability calculations as well.
Just one more question. And this is, again, it's a sort of subjective thing, but I can see that we do not want this development to handcuff or limit the progress of other industrial developments in that area, which is very important as an industrial part of Bristol, where that's where we need to give people jobs. Are you able to put a sort of like a percentage damage consequence to, if this went ahead, how limiting would it be to the further development of the rest of the area?
In terms of the maker spaces that are proposed, we could limit by condition the specific uses of the maker spaces. So we may be able to condition certain things such as output, emissions, that kind of thing, or the specific uses. In terms of the neighbouring sites, if this is approved, then there is nothing we can do in terms of the impact on the neighbouring sites in the future. So if someone wants an industrial site but can't operate next to a large amount of residential units, then effectively they're not going to take out that space. It might be worth, is it worth me passing this one over to you, Jack, who's our Economic Development Officer?
Thank you, Ben. I would agree with what Ben has said. It's very, very difficult to give a percentage sense of impact. I think it's fair to say that there could be an impact on the appetite of potential occupiers to take up space in that area going forward, depending on the type of operation that they would undertake. So I think really in short, the answer is yes, there could be an impact, but just can't define it.
So future applications could be coming back to us, and we might be saying, well, we'd have to refuse it because of protecting the amenity of the students that we've just given permission for today.
Can I hand that one back to Ben? Sorry.
Back to me. So let me, knowing the site, and this is again hypothetical, let's say the site next door within the PWA came forward also for residential. We would, because of the distances on either side of the street, it's unlikely we'd be able to accept any additional residential there because of the overlooking impact between the bedrooms. Whether or not a site comes forward looking to turn that site into for industrial use or enhanced employment land, again, if this development was there, that may have an impact on the desirability and attractiveness of those sites. And I mean, within the within the immediate area, I think there's a coach station, a bus station, garage. So there are things like that where there's going to be impacts as well.
Councillor Gooch.
Yeah, so I'm trying to make sense of the loading bays. So basically, obviously there's loading both for students, for when they arrive, when they leave, and also, any deliveries that they have. And then also the loading for the maker units, which sound like they don't have vehicular access. So how would the makers get the machinery in and service their units? Because that doesn't seem, they'd have to be making something that they could literally carry out in a wheelbarrow.
That's exactly my assessment that I set out in the report. But with regards to the transport, maybe I could hand that one over to Jane.
I'll start and then Jane can fill in. So basically, if you utilise any of the public highway, you have no guarantee that's for you, that's for the public, full stop. But in this instance, so you could ask for on-site provision for their deliveries, but they chose to be car-free there, which for students is normally then, but it's mixed use, so that it's quite complicated. But in this particular instance, it's part of our road safety concern is where those presumptions have been made about the curbside use. There's too much happening around in that area for us to be confident. That's really the essence of what we're saying, and that's why we've continued it as an issue, because it does lead to road safety concerns.
And another thing that I noted is that obviously there is a presumption that the students will use bicycles because it's a long way to walk to a bus stop. So they would need to use bicycles, but it sounds like the actual nearest bicycle route is not very user-friendly, and there isn't anything they can do about that. Is there any other arrangement that could be made to improve? They don't have control over other sites, so it's just really concerning for me that it's talking about students having to lift their bicycles up and negotiate quite complicated turns in dark conditions to actually be able to travel by bike, and that is pretty much the only travel option available to them.
You're moving into the discussion, I think,
Okay.
Caroline, if that's all right.
All right, fair enough.
I agree with your points, but you are moving into discussion. Do you have any further actual questions to officers? You're okay. Guy?
Thank you. Just in relation to some of the other questions, I suppose, but just looking at the map that we've got, how far is this actual unit itself from the main shopping district in Old Market?
Approximately 600 metres from the nearest bus stop.
600 metres. And from Hannah Moore Primary School?
I don't know because I haven't measured from a student development to the primary school, I'm afraid.
Looks like it's about 300 metres based on your previous answer. Is there any industrial unit that could go on that site that would pose a risk to the students living in this development that wouldn't propose a risk to the pupils at the school?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
So if we're worried that we're prejudicing the use of the PIWA, because residents in this new development would be at risk from the noise and from the pollution, I suppose what I'm asking is, given its proximity to both a school and a main shopping district and a huge amount of other residential accommodation, simply by dint of where it is, surely those uses would have been to an extent prejudiced out anyway.
I think the point is that it is already a designated PWA.
Yes.
So...
apologies, sorry, I've not made myself clear. We seem to be saying that we cannot put residential accommodation on this site because it would prejudice future industrial uses that might be polluting. What I'm saying is, given its proximity to a school and a shopping district, wouldn't those issues already be of concern?
So we're not saying that this site can't accommodate residential use. We're saying that this scheme in its current form is not acceptable for the reasons that we've outlined. Now there are various things that could be done by redesigning the scheme or a new design that would move the residential development further away from the boundaries of the PWA, reducing the height and scale to reduce the impact on neighbouring properties. Given the size of the scheme, coming back to the point that was made earlier, we could have found a way of getting a level access down to the cycle path so that the bikes could have come in. We're not saying this scheme can't handle residential use. We're just saying that this scheme in its current form is not something that we would recommend for planning permission.
Any further questions? No? Great. We move on to discussion, and I will take hands as they are raised. Richard, Fabian, try and operate my pen. Okay, Richard first.
Chairman, it's been my privilege to actually serve on planning committees for all but 2 years of my council service. Generally, I found it richly fulfilling, and I've certainly been indebted to the expertise and the information of officers. But on occasion, I do feel as if I'm living in a parallel universe, and one such occasion is this afternoon. I'm sure I don't need to remind members that in May we had local elections. Next week we have a general. I'm sure Caroline Gooch in particular is very aware of that. Can I have your indulgence just for a second? Churchill famously said, democracy has its flaws, but it's the best of the systems we have. And in my book, it's for local communities to help shape their communities, not for developers or planners. And I rate local neighbourhood plans as the top of the tree. I certainly wouldn't want to be in, for example, my neighbouring councillor Tim Kent's situation if suddenly officers sought to actually override his constituents' neighbourhood plan objectives. I don't think Tim or his colleagues would take that line down. And I'm very sympathetic to what we've heard today from the Old Market Community Association and also the Dings Community Association. It's very rare to have 2 residents groups actually saying, this applicant consulted us. It was a model of consultation. We've also got the ward councillor, Yasin, saying actually this is the scheme which he thinks his constituents need. It's been tailored to suit them. It provides much needed student accommodation within a very short distance of the new university campus at affordable housing rents. That's got to be a first for the city. And the applicant is also supplying some much needed community facilities and actually some employment space peppercorn rents for local industries. So what is there not to like? Frankly, I believe all the grounds the officers seem to have afraid for some bizarre reason. The kitchen sink over this, I believe I will not be supporting the officer recommendation to refuse. I'll be voting in favour of the scheme. I urge members to do likewise. Although I acknowledge there have been occasions where we've overturned officers' refusals and granted subject to conditions, there are some strong areas where I think conditions need to be approved here. So I think I would be minded, subject to what colleagues say, to agree that we are minded to approve subject to actually deferment and agreeing conditions.
Thank you, Richard. I think officers don't get a right of reply, but I don't think they were overriding the neighbourhood development plan. I think they were claiming this wasn't consistent with the neighbourhood development plan. So, next person is Fabian.
Yeah, like Richard, I've been on planning committees for a long time, and I've also been, in a situation where I've called in an application that officers wanted to refuse because I'd worked with the residents and they wanted it to go ahead. So I called it in and it went, and we got it approved, and that led to other positive developments. I have to admit, looking at this, I do agree with a lot of the officer recommendations. I am concerned about the lack of natural light, the issue of rooms being too hot or too cold. If you've got to have windows closed at night, I'm assuming the place isn't air conditioned. If you've got to have rooms open, closed at night because of the noise outside, so it's cook or don't sleep because you're too hot, or don't sleep because there's too much noise going on outside because of the agent and change principle, which I do support, then, there's the impact on the cultural side of the city. It's quite clear from the public statements and the public forum that the offered accommodation isn't appropriate. Looking at this, there are no loading bays. So that questions the viability of the industrial space or the, start-up space on the ground floor. I think it is overdevelopment. It's interesting that the officer said we're not ruling out any residential development on this area or part of this site at all. It's just that this is too big, and I think it's too big. There's problems with natural light. There's problems with quality of accommodation. I don't know. I mean, on a well-being front, what's it going to be like waking up just during a dull winter, and all you've got is the back, is the industrial sites around you as your accommodation. I mean, I think there's, I don't think we can approve this. I don't think we should approve this in its current form. Also, obviously, given that lots of other industrial land around the city, it makes this PIWA land far more precious and far more important, because if we displace industries that have nowhere else to go, where do they go? So, student accommodation can go. There's plenty of sites that student accommodation could be considered. There's also concerns, it didn't come up in the discussion, that, the access to the university campus, there's questions about how safe that would be, whether you're walking or cycling, and, the impracticality of, having to lug a bike over up and down steps to get to the cycle path, to get from the cycle shed to the cycle path, or if you're cycling on the main roads, you then have to sort of go all the way through to the back of the compound to get to that. I think, I think there's so much wrong with this design that I will have to vote against it. Obviously, if a new design comes in, I'll consider it with an open mind. But I think this design as it stands is one I cannot support. Thank you, and I'll support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Pulteney.
Thank you, Chair. I really have been from pillar to post on this one. Looking at what's in front of us, one of the pieces of advice that we always used to get from the former Chair of Planning was that one of the most important comparisons to make is between the scheme in front of you and what's currently there. Does it improve on the objectives made when you compare the one to the other? Now, it's true, as it says in the officer's report, that the quantum, if you like, of commercial to residential is obviously dramatically different in the scheme proposed as to what's there currently. But if one compares the commercial availability on the site at the moment to what's proposed, you find a relatively small, I would say, drop-off in the amount of commercial space. The difference is that the residential is substantially bigger. But what we'd be talking about is a net loss of commercial space of either 828 or 714 square feet, which isn't that much. It strikes me in the grand scheme of things. And it's not hard to see why the community is so supportive of this scheme. Adding that number of what used to be called chimney pots in the old planning jargon will do a huge amount to make the businesses in Old Market already more viable. The scheme provides something arguably more suited to the employment needs of the local community. It certainly provides more and different and more flexible opportunities for the employment land that remains. However, do have concerns about the residential amenity for occupiers, have significant concerns about the issues that the transport officer has raised, and there seems to be an awful lot that normally would have just been sort of tweaked out and adapted to during the planning process that hasn't happened in this case. And I have to admit, I'm not quite sure from the exchange that I've just heard whether the situation would be that because of the agent of change principle, students would be unable to open their windows at night because of the risk of noise or whatever, or whether it would simply be undesirable for them to. But that strikes me as something that really needs clearing up. I'm not sure which of those situations is the case. I'm also not entirely sure, and I would say this is a huge fan of Invisible Circus. I'm assuming Invisible Circus's use of that space does meet the criteria for employment land, industrial land. I'm not sure. Possibly I'm thinking of a somewhat outmoded view of what constitutes employment land, but there we go. So I find myself in a not dissimilar position, preparing myself for the recoil, in a not dissimilar position to Councillor Eddy. I think where my mind is at is not to go with the officer's recommendation, but to suggest to the committee that we accept the development in principle, but that we actually might defer the decision in order to allow officers to work with the developers to deal with those specific concerns around the amenity of the occupiers, the transport concerns, and whether there is any possibility of ensuring that there is no net loss of employment land. That might be possible. It might be possible, as has been said, to bring the cycle storage to ground level or to avoid that issue. But I think, given the circumstances and given the strength of feeling that there clearly is in the local community and how finely balanced I think we would all agree this application is, to give it the absolute best chance of success. So that's currently where I'm at. Thanks.
Thank you. If I could do a Richard and make my comments now, although Richard, in fact, normally begins as chair with his own comments, I do notice, but so I've left mine to the middle. I have a big problem with the principle of development and this being fundamentally this compromising designated industrial land. That's a designation that's in our planning documents. And we're not here to look for something that's better than what was there before. We're here to look at something, compare an application against our own planning documents that we have voted in democratically. Maybe not us, but this council has democratically approved in the past until we bring in new policies and a new local plan. Those are the ones we live with. That would be my first point. My second point would be, in terms of long-term, in terms of our transition to sustainable transport modes, particularly active travel. If you look at student accommodation in Bedminster Green, that accommodation is designed with cycle paths to the campus, walking infrastructure to the campus and a station next to it, bus lanes, etc., etc. It is designed from the beginning so that those students will have no need for a car. Now, if you do not design that in from the beginning, or you allow applications whose design and positioning does not encourage the transition to sustainable modes of transport, then you will not be able to retrofit them later on. That bridge with Network Rail going over it, Network Rail ownership, you're not going to change that, and you're not going to widen those pavements. They are what they are, and people are likely to use cars, and they're likely to use taxis, because it will be quite unsafe to walk under there. So I think this doesn't contribute to our transition to more sustainable modes of transport as it stands, and I should be voting against it. And next person on my list is Councillor Stone.
Yeah, hello. This is my first time on the planning committee, so thank you very much for welcoming me. I find it, honestly, I'm usually on the other side, where I'm usually with, like Yasin here, sort of like, putting forward objections against something that's been approved by council officers, to be honest with you. So I'm finding it really difficult. I'm finding this one quite difficult. I'm kind of on the edge, because on one side I do want to support local residents, the community at large, who have obviously worked with Dominus to actually try and create something kind of like that's structured and organised. But on the other side, I can quite clearly see, and I've listed quite a few, how this proposal does actually really undermine some of the actual principles of building and the regulations to make sure that we actually really do put the people, the residents living in there, at the forefront of the development. I mean, when we're looking at 37% of students that will not get sunlight, I mean, you have to really think about the overall design. When you're looking at only one, like a pour door, where only one person, there's only one door into the whole occupant over the whole development, which used to be known as a pour door, and the densification of it all, and even when we're having these conversations about light industrial units, maker spaces. What type of, as Councillor O'Rourke has explained, what type of maker spaces will they be? Is it just going to be card, or is it going to be really industrial? It's going to be really a difficult thing to do. Then we have Active Travel England that want to not approve this because of the walking and cycle infrastructure that's around it that hasn't been properly developed all the way through this. We have BREEAM standards that there's no actual, I want to see, a report that actually tells me they are going to reach excellence in the BREEAM standards, and I can't see that in the report. Obviously we do need student accommodation. I think there's 2.78 students to every one bed, but it's not for us, the city, to provide that, to be honest with you, or if we are going to provide it, we've got to make sure that we provide it so that students can actually live there, and it's not just putting it up for putting it up's sake. I mean, this is something that I'm finding really really difficult, because on one hand I'm hearing what the community are saying and I want to support them, but on the other hand I have to go by my morals, my principles.
Thank you. Councillor O'Rourke is next on my list.
Thank you. I've not been on this committee all that long, but I'm sort of getting a bit more used to it. In this case, I'm much more conflicted between my head and my heart than I normally am. I think there's an awful lot to really like about this. I don't think that the massing is huge. I like this. I can really buy into the imaginative mixture of residential and the placemaking, the maker spaces. We're not even talking about the lovely scented gardens and all of those things that are in the planning applications. However, and I mean I am coming to a however, I always consider livability, and livability on this really, you have to question it because of the density and what everybody said about sustainability and light and all of those things. And, from my understanding of it, we have this hierarchy, which I think is NZC2, which says that for the hierarchy on cooling and heating, it starts with the orientation of the building, and it seems that the orientation of the building is just wrong. These two fingers, are always going to have this situation when, and you've got to change that, I think, or that's the starting point. And I think another concern I have is for future use. So I can see that, they could be adapted if the student market dies down and for homes. And where I could be persuaded that transient students who are not there over the summer and all of those sort of things, that the amenity standards for them I might think are more variable. But for future use, if you're going to put families in there, it may be in 1 or 2 or 10 decades time, or I don't know, whatever, maybe 10 decades is too far. But you know what I mean? Then the loss of light and the dampness and all of those sort of things, I think you have to give even more weight to that then. And ultimately, it's not a commercial development, and it's a PIWA. And I think I see where Guy is coming from, where he, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what Guy wants us to do is to go, okay, there's, X thousand spaces of industrial there at the moment. If we can keep that more or less and then put all the residential on top of it, can we not factor it in and apply the policy that way? I'm presuming you can't. But, that's still a question. I think that is ultimately the question that Guy was trying to ask. Can we not just bend the policy by saying, you've nearly got the same amount of commercial and now we've got all this residential on top? Can I just finish one other thing and then you can come back and answer that? So it's not a commercial budget. And the other thing as well is that, ultimately, at the end of all of this, what we will get will be 282 units which come off our housing list. And if we're doing that, then on the other hand, we are jeopardising our local plan decision to keep that as a light industry commercial area. So when I add it all up, I would either have to reject it today, or I would support Guy's idea of deferring it and coming back with more details and some of these more concerns being able to be answered.
Thank you. Are there any further comments before I go to a vote? Councillor Gooch?
So I'm really on a knife edge about this. I think I'd really like to be able to see the Invisible Circus be able to stay there. And obviously, this space that they're going to be offered is not going to allow them to do the trapeze work that they want. And I understand they're being offered alternative sites, but they haven't got one at the moment. And there's obviously an awful lot of people want to keep that. I wondered whether or not really the northwest, the most northeasterly block could actually have been retained as Invisible Circus below, and then with the accommodation above. That would obviously take out some of the maker spaces. So I think it's a shame that hasn't been followed through. There's things like access for the townhouses could have access to the street as well as access at the back into the rest of the student accommodation. The transport thing, yes, does worry me. I just noted, though, it would take an 11-minute walk to walk from this site to the dental hospital. So this could be a good site for accommodation of dental students, and we need more of those. So yeah, I'm very much in two minds. I'd like to see some changes. We'd definitely like to see some changes to it. I note that some of the bedrooms don't meet the university minimum design requirements, and it says that the generosity of ensuite rooms mitigates that, but I don't see that it mitigates that for the students who will actually be in those smaller rooms. And the things about the not being able to have your windows open. Don't know. I'm not worried about long corridors. My own student accommodation had those. I think that's okay as long as you've got areas where the students with reduced abilities have shorter walks. But I'd like to see more information about the overheating and the light, and maybe it could, be 6 stories instead of 8, to get some more light in there. I don't know. I'm very on the fence about it at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCowie?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's my first time sitting in planning. I'm not as experienced as other colleagues here. And coming to this case, which is really very difficult to take side, because the community supporting the plan, the project, and the recommendation from the officers rejecting it in the middle of. I want to support it because we want to build houses in our city. We need more houses, but we need it in the right place and with the right design and all of it, So I think my colleagues, they said what is we are not happy with, and we are happy with building more houses in the city, but we want it to be built right and built in the right recommendation, because when it's built, so we can change it. So we can agree with something it's not with the recommendation of the officers, which they know better than us, but we came and we need more of these houses to be built and ease the crisis of the housing in our city. So we needed to recall again with a new design as a recommendation of the officers, and I will be happy to support it if it's come back and we visited the site and we see. Because it's in industrial areas, but as well, if the community want it, and because that will benefit them, so I will be happy to support that.
Fabian?
Just very quick, there's I think, it's interesting listening to the rest of the committee. I think the only logical thing we can do with this is refuse it as it is, because there's going to be so much that'll need to be changed for it to be acceptable and to tick all the boxes and deal with all the concerns that we have, that they'll have to go back to the drawing board and come up with something else. Obviously, if they do, then we can consider that with an open mind on its own merits, bearing in mind the fact that it's still a PWA site. But obviously, if they do that, then we'll deal with that if it comes back to this committee. As it stands, I just think there's so much wrong with it, and so much that isn't going to work, that I don't see how we could condition it to fix it. So I think we're going to have to reject it.
Thank you. Councillor Durston?
Thanks. This is also my first planning committee, so I've just been trying to soak it all in. Based on the amount of objections from council officers, I really feel like there's so much that would need to be changed on this application. And the question that I'm asking myself is it okay to expect young people who are coming to our city to go to university to accept a lesser quality of life and amenity and access to sustainable transport than we would expect for other residents of this city? And my answer to that question is no, so I would also be liable to refuse this application.
Thank you. Councillor Stone?
Yeah, I think I'm going to continue from where Councillor Destin left off, because I was going to actually kind of like also want to just say, in it, although I do support where communities are, we also have to ask the question: the community don't have to live there. At the end of the day, students are living there, not the community. So whatever the community benefits are, great, and there are some, as we've heard. What we have to really consider is the welfare of the people living in this accommodation. It's something I've been really, really supportive of all the way through my 3 years as a councillor. It's making sure that we build properties and developments in our cities that put the welfare of the people living in those developments. So when we look at where it is, the isolation, where it's a student accommodation, it's highly dense, it is just not conducive for allowing young people to live in that particular accommodation.
Thanks. Councillor Poultney, did you have your hand up again? I'm inclined to bring this to a close.
Thanks, Chair. Just for clarity, I do think it's important to state, as all of you know, I think I represent the ward of Cotton. There's a huge number of students living in it at the moment, and I would come back quite strongly against the notion that there's a difference between the community and the students. Students are part of the community. The community accepts and lives amongst the students. The two things are largely one and the same, and I think it's really important to state that. Equally, wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment that students shouldn't be exploited. The idea that I've always been uncomfortable with the idea that student accommodation is subject to lower standards of things than accommodation is more generally. And I do feel the need to also mention the standard of some of the student accommodation in the city already, following from the university's expansion, such as it has been, the number of rapidly, poorly converted HMOs that students are currently living in, the abysmal quality of some of the student accommodation that we see around the city already, and the effect that that's had on the private rental market, and the fact that it is entirely overcooked rents in the city because that expansion has grown to an extent out of control. Now, in this case, we do have a significant number of bed spaces to add, very, very close to I think they're called urban centres now, but what I used to call a high street. It's very, very close to principal shopping district of the city as a whole. It's a stone's throw from Temple Mead Station. It strikes me as being, in some ways, aside from its current sort of zoning, actually, in some respects, an ideal place to put accommodation of this sort. And as I said earlier, I will very happily, should the Chair's moving of the officer's recommendation fall, will happily put forward an alternative proposal. And if that falls, then we can always go back to the drawing board ourselves. But for now, I think this is a scheme that deserves at least the opportunity to do a little bit more work with officers, a little bit more work with the developers, just to see if we can come to something that assuages, if not the concerns of all members of this committee, enough members of this committee. So I'll leave it there.
No, because I'm going to... I move the officer's recommendation to refuse the application. Fabian, would you like to second it? Great, thank you very much. So I shall now go around each of you one by one and ask, will you support the motion to refuse this application in line with the officer's recommendation? Councillor Eddy? Against. Councillor Poultney?
Against the officer recommendation, for clarity.
You're against the officer's recommendation. Okay. Councillor O'Rourke? For. Councillor McCowie? For. Councillor Stone?
For.
Councillor Gooch?
Reluctantly, for.
Councillor Durston?
For.
Councillor Breckles?
For.
And myself, for.
That's, yeah.
Have you got all that?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
774.
Okay, thank you. So the officer recommendation stands and the application is refused. I want to say thank you to all the officers who've given time today to support this meeting, and I look forward to seeing everyone at the next DCB. Thank you.